Hello, leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host, joined today by Vinit Nijhawan, a strategic visionary who has conceived and built several technology organizations that have been acquired by companies such as Boeing, Motorola, and Qualcomm. Vinit is an admired leader and mentor who has built or inherited and then effectively managed several high-performance teams. He has worked in many industries: computing, aerospace, logistics, medical devices, biopharma, synthetic biology, and others. In 2008, he intentionally pivoted his career from technology entrepreneur and CEO to helping other entrepreneurs with a special focus on academia. He began teaching entrepreneurship at Boston University and subsequently led the Office of Technology Development from 2010 to 2016. In this role, Vinit participated in several BU committees and organizations and has represented BU on several boards and business plan grant review panels. Subsequently, Vinit took the OTD experience and launched a national academic IP monetization program with 40 institutions engaged, including UC Berkeley and UCLA. He launched Waterloo Alumni Angel and his alma mater. Most recently, Vinit is the managing director of Mass Ventures. It is such an honor and pleasure to see you again and have you with me today.
It's my pleasure.
First, can you please share with us your story, your personal story, and what's in between the lines of your inspiring journey?
Well, truthfully, when people look at my LinkedIn, it looks very confusing because there's a lot of stuff there, but really my story's been a very simple one. So I started my first company as an engineering student at the University of Waterloo in Canada, and subsequently was part of 5 startups, 3 as CEO, and they were all in obviously tech startups, but specifically in aerospace and telecom. That's what I did for 25 years. And then 15 years ago, I decided to move from being a parent, as I call it, running companies, to becoming a grandparent, helping other entrepreneurs run their companies, successfully. And that really took 2 directions. One was teaching at Boston University, and the other was investing. And the teaching kind of led to running the tech transfer office at Boston University for 5 years, where we launched 8 venture-backed companies, primarily in life sciences and healthcare.
So as you founded several startups, you scaled them, exited them, and I love now how you talk about being a parent and a grandparent, helping others launch their companies. What is for you, or is there even a magic formula that you think makes startups a successful venture?
Man, if I had the answer to that question, I'd be a billionaire right now. All that magic formula. But look, ultimately, there are 3 things that conspire, right? It's a good team, a good technology, and the right timing for a market. Right timings for markets is very, very hard to figure out. Good technology is important, but there's so much good technology in the world. So really it comes down to the team, in my opinion. So I put a lot of emphasis on the team, even when I make investment decisions.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you look at for a team, a founding team? What are the capabilities you look at? What are the specificities beyond capabilities, maybe?
Yeah, so number one, it's helpful if it's more than one person, right? So I don't know what the ideal size of a startup team is, but I think a team of 3 I find to be quite an effective startup team size. The other thing you're looking for are the right kind of qualities, and in particular, the one thing that I look for are people that are coachable, because there's always a lot to learn when you're a startup, and especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur. The second is The best entrepreneurs, in my mind, are those ones who are like this perfect combination of determined yet flexible. So what does that mean? I think the way I'll use an analogy which might sound funny, but it's what the Buddha taught us, right? What the Buddha taught us is that there are many paths to the truth, but there's only one truth. It's the same in startups, right? There are many paths to a startup. Any startup, you will find you need to be determined about the end result. So you've decided what your vision is or what point you're trying to solve. That's your fixed point. That's your truth. But there'll be lots of little pivots, and different paths you have to take to get to it. So that's the flexibility. So you have to be sort of completely focused on that endpoint, but you want to be flexible enough because you're listening to the market all the time and trying to do those little pivots, right? And if you're smart, you do a lot of small pivots. If you haven't done it well, you have to do some big pivots, and that really kills companies.
So, talking about companies, you shared that you also look into healthcare now. Companies, is there anything different in those that you look for, or do you think what you shared, and I love this mix of determined yet flexible, team of three, coachable, is it kind of like the same makeup regardless of the industry you're in other words?
I think it's the same makeup. I think what's different about healthcare is, unlike other big markets, like pick anything, consumer goods or, cars or, real estate. Those markets, by and large, function the same way all over the world. Healthcare, however, doesn't. Healthcare functions very differently, in different countries. And so, you have to be very knowledgeable and cognizant of the fact that it operates very differently in different countries. So you need a team, I think, that has some knowledge of the country they're in and how it functions. And of course, that leads to the fact that, if you can't be a global player because each nation has its own healthcare system, then you've got to be in a big enough market opportunity, right? So the US is about half the market for pretty much anything in healthcare, whether it's new drugs or new medical devices. So the US market is a very important one, but it functions very differently than, say the Canadian market or parts of the European market.
Sure, I totally agree that differences in healthcare in each one of the countries is always an interesting challenge when you're looking at global companies. I've been into different markets, different geographies. It's different, even though at the end the purpose is the same, right? We're trying to make life better for patients, but I agree how you get there and the regulations are always very different.
Not just the regulations, but how you get paid. That is like a big piece of it.
Yeah. So you also, as you shared, you also led teams successfully and had very high performing team in tech and telecom before moving into investing and being a professor at BU. How did you personally lead teams, and how do you define high performing team, and how did you lead those? What is your biggest learning? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and look, let's be clear, it was an evolution, right? It wasn't like I woke up one day and became a great leader. It took a lot of, learning and coaching along the way. I just started early. And look, I mean, first and foremost, a leader has to be very clear about that vision, about that truth that I talked about earlier, right? So be very clear in your mind of what that is. because now you've got to articulate it to not just the people you're trying to hire, but also your customers and, investors and others. So if you're very clear about what that endpoint is, now you can sort of work backwards and say, okay, what does my team have to, look like? What do my investors have to look like, right? Who are my early adopter customers? So you want to figure all that out before you start hiring people for your team, because you want to have a really good picture, and some people call it a business plan, of where you're trying to get to. And once you have sort of a clear business plan, now you can think about what kind of people you want around you to help you.
So talking about people, if I want to be more specific, there is, through the 80 plus interviews I already had in this podcast, there is different views about complementarity of a team, some ideas about you need a team that build obviously trust, but how you can build also conflicts sometimes that are positive and ends up with innovation. I'd love to hear, like, as you're building team, what is the construct you usually look for?
Yeah, so the one thing I've also learned is that different cultures bring, sort of different views of how you construct your team. So, the US is a very professional culture, right? Which means if I hire a VP of sales, or I hire a CFO, or I hire a VP of engineering, I can almost certainly find somebody who's done that role before. And I don't have to hire somebody that I know personally or I've worked with before. It could be somebody completely out of the blue that I've hired. And immediately once I hire them, they're inside the trust envelope, right? Because it's kind of a very professional market. That's not always the case everywhere, right? And so, I'll give an example. I find a lot of European companies, French companies particularly, when they're expanding to the US, they will send one of their trusted people from Europe to come and establish themselves here, right? But do not know the market here at all. And I try to explain to them that, listen, if you hire somebody here, a business development person or vice president of sales, once you've hired them, there's no conflict. They're not going to go anywhere else. They're only going to be dedicated to you, because that's the kind of professional, workforce there is here. And people find that hard to understand, because I think in many other cultures, you first have trust and then you think about, the roles. I think it should be the other way around. I think the trust develops. First, you think about the absolute right people for each role that you're hiring for, the best. And then a good leader builds the trust,
Yeah, I love those. You're touching several points on cultural differences, leadership within cultural differences, and then how you build trust, obviously, which is, do you start with trust? How do you deal with trust? Is trust something that you just say, okay, we trust one another and it works, or not? So it's really powerful points you're bringing.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the reality is, for any leader, trust is constantly earned. So it's not static. I mean,
exactly.
you're constantly, people are always looking at you to see, okay, you've defined this truth. Is it really, or are you like shifting? So there are a lot, you'd be surprised. I mean, people are very astute.
Yeah.
They can figure out whether a leader really believes in the direction or doesn't.
No, for sure. And as we said, it's always so hard to get to this trust, but you can destroy it in fractions of seconds. So there's always this, as a leader, do you really stand for what you're saying, and do you really believe in what you're saying? I want to give you a word, and I'd love a reaction to it. And so the first word is leadership.
Well, I think it's an overused word, but so let me use a little example. So when I first kind of moved into a big office space, I wanted to have my office be in the same place as everybody else, and all the employees basically pushed back on that and wanted to put me into a corner office. And what you realize is that hierarchy is something that I just fundamentally exists in human nature. So so that's why the word leadership, I think, has become important, because ultimately, people are looking for a person, both people below that person. By below, I mean kind of the ones who are executing, as well as the people above, who are investing. So that's what leadership means to me, as an individual.
So did you end up accepting it? I'd love to double click on this, with the example you gave of being in the middle.
Yeah, I ended up accepting the corner office, yeah.
Okay, so so how is your view now on hierarchy? Did it change? Do you think it's something that is here? You're saying it's fundamental for human nature.
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. People talk about kind of millennials and Gen Z, and how they want to have a lot more say. Look at what's happened at Twitter, right? Or some of these tech companies. Of course, people want to have a say, and they might be more willing to be verbal, but I don't think that's changed. Look, I've always find that there's three types of people in an organization, right? There's they're the type who understand the direction of the company and are bought into it, right? Vocally. Then there are the people who vocally dissent, right? For very legitimate reasons. They don't buy into it, but are very vocal about it. Those are really good people to know, because you want to be open-minded and listen to them. You don't want to fire them like Musk does, right? Every time somebody says something bad about Twitter, he fires them from his team. The third type, which I think is the most dangerous, is the silent opposition. And that exists in every organization. So there are people who don't believe in the vision or the direction of the company, but aren't vocal about it. But they aren't vocal about it to the leadership or broadly, but they're the ones who are gossiping and saying things next to the water cooler. Those are the people you have to find and root out.
So the second word I'd love a reaction to is entrepreneurship.
So another overused word. It's interesting if you look at what all the universities are doing is they don't use entrepreneurship as much anymore. Now what they use is a term called the entrepreneurial mindset, because most of the people doing MBAs, for example, aren't going to go to startups. They're going to go to bigger companies, but these bigger companies want that entrepreneurial mindset as well. And so what is an entrepreneurial mindset? I mean, basically it's someone who is always questioning the status quo, right? That is what a good entrepreneur is. You're always questioning the status quo. In other words, you're constantly thinking about better ways to do things, right? And that's what an entrepreneurial mindset is, that even within a company, you're always thinking, well, how can this be improved? I mean, if you're a surgeon, you're all the really good entrepreneurial mindset surgeons are always thinking, okay, what if I had this instrument instead of this instrument? I could do my job faster and better, right? Now, the hard part becomes going from an N of one, where you know that your life would be better if you had this change or this product or whatever. Now you got to find out whether there's 100 other people like you that feel the same. And that's what a lot of entrepreneurs have a hard time with, especially the technical entrepreneurs. I used to be like that too. You just said, hey, this is a better technology. I know it's a better technology, so everybody else must know it's a better technology. But that's not how it works, right? You have to go out there and do your customer discovery, right? So I don't know. I may have used too many words for my response to entrepreneurship, but
no, it's great. It's great. The third one is Vanaprastha.
Sorry,
am I pronouncing it correctly? Vanaprastha?
I mean, I think it's a Sanskrit word, if I remember correctly, that's a lot like, well, you talk about servant leader, right? So Vanaprastha is so in Hinduism, there are 4 stages in your life, right? And so Vanaprastha is the 3rd stage. So your first stage, brahmacharya, is as a student. Your second stage, grihastha, is as a family person, right? Where you're like you're in the, like you're creating a family with children, and I have. Vanaprastha is when you're giving back. It's your giving back stage of your life. And then the last stage, which is very controversial, is your sannyasa stage, where you give it all up and become an ascetic, right? To get nirvana, you put on the saffron robe and you beg for your food and you own nothing. Okay. That's the hardest.
That's the controversial piece.
Yes.
So and I saw on LinkedIn you talk about empathy and practicing Vanaprastha. I'd love to hear more about how you think of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, so fundamentally, in the first 2 stages, you've built up a lot of knowledge, maybe some wealth, and your 3rd stage, the Vanaprastha stage, is when you take that knowledge and wealth and you spread it to other people, right? And there's, of course, many ways to do that. The way I've practiced it is teaching and investing, because I think they're both very relevant, because in both you're passing your knowledge on, but you're also passing wealth on, right? And because frankly, I want my students to become wealthy, right? I mean, that's part of the goal of passing them knowledge. So empathy, let me back up. So I've created this top 10 qualities of a successful entrepreneur, Letterman style. And my number 1 quality is generosity. Right. Empathy is in there too, but I think generosity in some ways is the ultimate empathy. And what I mean by generosity is, like, all the best entrepreneurs are very generous. They're generous with their time. They're generous with their family. They're generous with their stock options. They're generous to their customers. They'll never let their customers down. And so I think generosity is a very critical quality of a good leader.
Yeah, I love how you said that generosity is the ultimate empathy. The last word is spread love in organizations.
So it's interesting. I'm a very sort of physical person, right? So I'm always hugging my employees and just having that sense of connectivity. And the world has changed a lot, and people, even my wife says, you really shouldn't be doing so much of that because, you're going to get yourself into trouble, with the Me Too movement and all that. And I said, look, people always know when it's genuine. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there is a sense of genuineness that people are very attuned to. And so first and foremost, I think, love comes from being genuine, right? Where you're genuinely interested in these other people, in their success. You're genuinely interested in their career growth. Like, I literally sit down with all my people, and the first question I always ask is, okay, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? And, and then look, how can we work together to get you on that path? Right? 5 years from now, you may not be working in this company. You could be somewhere else. So let's figure out what the best way is of getting you there. Right? So I think that kind of genuineness in helping people with their careers, that's the ultimate love in organizations.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, many times we refer to it genuine care on this podcast. Many talked about this, and I still believe in it. So thanks for your words about it. Any final word of wisdom for leaders around the world?
Yeah, I think that especially in healthcare, there is a huge opportunity for change. And, healthcare has been around for centuries, right? If not millennia. If you look at the old texts, of Chinese texts or Indian texts, people were practicing fairly advanced healthcare 5,000 years ago. We've lost a lot of that knowledge, right? And, like, for example, a simple thing like diagnosis. That family doctor, who had the pattern recognition, who could diagnose just by looking at you, looking inside your throat, feeling your pulse, feeling your temperature or whatever, that's gone now. And now we're dependent on instruments and blood draws and, all those things. And in some ways, diagnosis is so poor in today's healthcare system all over the world. And that creates an enormous amount of cost to the healthcare system, because if you start with misdiagnosis, then you're just going to spend money on the wrong things. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for new leaders in healthcare to evolve our healthcare system to truly being one, that's not fixing problems, but being ahead. It is sort of wellness, right? Not surgery. So, we need surgery too, but there's enormous lack of wellness in human society that needs to be rectified, and we need the leaders, who recognize that, and we're starting to see that in the younger generation. Yeah,
and it touches all preventive medicine, well-being, general health, and I totally convey with you on this. Thank you so much again for being with me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Of course, Naji.
Thank you all for listening to Spread Love in Organizations podcast. Subscribe and connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Most importantly, spread love in your organizations and spread the word around you to inspire others and amplify this movement our world so desperately needs.